This is a high-grade special on gender equality in mining. Why is the gender gap in mining so wide? Are women somehow less suited for life in the extractives industry? Or is there something else at play? Katie Heller has helped shape the gender agenda for some of the world's largest development organizations, and I ask her, what is it that is really holding women back? Katie, welcome to Highgrade.
Thanks very much.
Let's start with a basic question. What is gender equality?
Gender equality is when people don't feel that their life opportunities are defined by their gender.
So what do you respond to those people that say that gender equality is actually about equal outcome?
I think the idea that we're going for a 50-50 split is a bit overly pits men and women against each other. We're not trying to go for equality of outcome because that sort of presupposes that everybody wants the same thing. I think the objective is not necessarily a 50-50 split, but a feeling among everybody that they have the same opportunities to choose and that it's not about their gender that limits what they're able to do.
One idea in the broader gender debate, it has been the suggestion that women are capable of doing any job that men can do, which to some extent erodes the notion that sexes are intrinsically different. Where do you stand on this?
There isn't an intrinsic difference. So much of it comes down to how we're socialized. There's a lot of research that shows the benefits of gender diversity, of all kinds of diversity, and innovation and profitability and performance. And I think those really, it doesn't come down to intrinsic gender differences. I mean, I think diversity of all sorts is very helpful and beneficial. And I think this idea that men are inherently better at some things than women are is not so much about intrinsic gender differences so much as the way we've been socialized. I mean, the idea that men can negotiate better or that women are more collaborative leaders, is that based on some sex-specific criteria, or is that the way that we're raised? And also, I think, you know, we're in a really globalized world, and these differences are super cultural. So when we're working with people from all over the world, to rely on kind of very cultural specific generalizations is also limiting and limits us from benefiting from a great range of diversity.
But does this hold true even for work that requires physical strength?
I don't know how many pull-ups you can do. I can't do any. There are many women I know who can do lots. So to generalize all women is just limiting, you know. I think there's plenty of women who can do really labor-intensive things. There's many men who can't. Also, the sector is really moving away from really manual labor jobs. So yeah, I think we just lose out so much by assuming that gender is the characteristic that defines who's capable for what.
Let's then look more particularly on the extractive sector. There is this stereotype of oil and mining being harsh and a male-dominated industry. But to what extent is this still the case today?
I think it's definitely still the case. I mean, in every company and context in which I've worked, certainly it's male-dominated. And I think that's changing for sure. There's a lot of interest in gender diversity now. I have been doing some work for the IFC, and for the IFC we wrote a toolkit for companies specifically on how to increase representation of women and gender equality and gender diversity in mining, oil, gas, and mining companies, specifically in the workforce, in the supply chain, in community engagement, and also how to address gender-based violence. And that toolkit was really based on demand that was coming from companies. Companies were increasingly asking IFC, how do we do this? They really wanted to. And also, it was demand-driven, but I've seen that it is, in fact, driving demand. Now that we have this product, an increasing number of companies and industry associations and NGOs and governments are asking us for more information and how to use this toolkit. And one heartening thing I've seen is a lot of companies are coming to us who are maybe subsidiaries of parent companies, and they're actually asking for guidance because their parent companies have gender targets now. So the industry is changing and companies are trying to keep up. And there's a lot of recognition that gender diversity brings a lot of benefits.
I'd like to explore the reasons behind this gender gap in the sector. Why do you think there still are so many more men than women in the sector?
I think it's a complicated question. I think it certainly has a historical root, that there are lots of countries where there have been, some where there still are laws against women even going underground. Some places it's laws, some places it's superstition that if a woman goes into a mine, she's going to cause an explosion or send the minerals further down into the ground. So there's a long historical background, which I think dovetails with a social perception that maybe the natural resource sector is not a place for women. I think when you haven't had women in it, then it becomes somewhere that women are hesitant to go, or for instance, their families. I've been in contexts where parents don't want their daughters to go into the natural resources sector because it's seen as such a male-dominated sector, and that's seen as inappropriate, and in some places even can sort of be damaging to a woman's reputation. I was in one country where a woman told me that her job in the mining sector led her whole village to say that she was a prostitute and that she must have slept her way into the job. So you have this sort of historical precedent, and then I think that leads into an ongoing perception of it as a male sector, which leads to few role models for women. So it's not necessarily something that women necessarily think about as a viable sector. And then the industry itself, in some ways, is not so encouraging for women. Does it even sort of actively reach out to women in recruitment? Do the jobs seem friendly to women? Does it even accommodate women in the personal protective equipment? So I think it's this very ongoing, a bit of a vicious cycle where there aren't a lot of women, and so that's not terribly encouraging for more women to become engaged in the sector.
Let me bring in somewhat of a controversial question, perhaps, but on the same topic, maternity. Perhaps a personal question as well. Is maternity a competitive disadvantage for women's careers?
At the moment, yeah, I think so. But I think that has to do more with societal expectations necessarily than anything else. I think there's two things really. One is how, in terms of the natural resources sector, how family friendly are jobs. And I say family friendly and not mother friendly because it should be about creating opportunities for both parents to take flexible work, to be able to return from leave and not feel that their career prospects are going to be damaged, that both parents would feel encouraged. There's a number of ways that companies can try and make things more family friendly. I think mining companies and oil and gas, where you have this fly-in, fly-out nature and remote work sites that often requires being away from the family for a long time, that really gets at the question of who's doing the family care responsibilities. If you're really equally sharing it, I mean, in my experience, growing a baby and breastfeeding a baby are pretty much women, that's hard to swap, but beyond that, it's pretty equal opportunity. So beyond that initial stage, I don't think there's any reason that it needs to be more about the mother than the father, but in many societies it is. Even places where you have a lot of generous parental leave, fathers still take less than mothers. So as long as we have that imbalance, then yeah, it's definitely a competitive disadvantage for where women are expected to take a lot more time out. And I was just reading a study by Harvard Business Review that said that women who take, or parents who take longer parental leave, either one, are seen as less dedicated and they're seen as less ambitious. And they found a lot of ways to mitigate that, but we still have this perception that even when people take just what's legally allowed, there's this perception that that's lack of dedication to the job, and where women take more of that leave than men do, then it's certainly a disadvantage for women.
But some would say that motherhood is actually not what is hindering women's career. It's in fact that they are too agreeable to lead. Do you give any credit to that view?
No. I think that is socialization. I mean, the idea that there's certain intrinsic characteristics for women that make them less capable of leading? No. I mean, I certainly see where that comes from. I think that those are social characteristics that have to do with how we raise our daughters or how we raise women, how we expect them to be. I mean, you often hear this double standard of men being described as assertive and women being described as aggressive, and men are take charge and women are bitchy or too bossy. So I don't think there's anything inherent that makes women too agreeable to lead. I think we sort of see men and women in different contexts and different boxes. We also have the trope of the like mama bear, the super protective and aggressive mother. So how does that jive with this idea that women are too, nice to lead? It's sort of all, I think that's a box we put women in. And I think we've all met plenty of women who are not, pushovers. I think that's as much, these generalizations, are just damaging.
We've talked now about workforce and women in the workforce in the mining sector. Let's consider gender equality beyond the direct mining workforce and mining communities. Do mining communities, in your view, face challenges, gender inequalities that arise due to the presence of a mining company in particular?
I don't think these issues arise due to the sector. I think they are often exacerbated by the presence of the sector. It exacerbates existing gender inequalities.
Can you give an example?
I mean, just sort of hypothetically and an amalgamation of a lot of different places. Let's say you have an agricultural community where land is held by men. Men and women farm together, but the land is in men's names. And you have a mining company coming in and changing land use patterns. Maybe the fields become further away because certain fields have been made into, access roads and for the mine and everything. And so maybe some agricultural jobs are lost, but new jobs are created in the mining sector. But those, due to cultural expectations, those go mostly to the men. So women have lost access to something, whereas the men have now gained a job and the women haven't. And the men are compensated for the land because the land is titled in their names, but men and women were once equally using that land. But now the men have the compensation and it goes into a bank account that perhaps due to the legal structure is in their name. So women have now lost their livelihoods, their access to income. They're not really being compensated in a lot of situations. I think more traditionally, I think this is changing, where a company comes in and talks to the community representatives. That's often the men in the community. The women are often, in many situations are kind of represented, but not necessarily given a voice. You have instances where I'm working in a situation now where the young women feel that they don't have a lot of economic opportunities, and so they're engaging in transactional relationships with the mine workers. And they're getting pregnant and the mine workers are leaving, and then that really inhibits their opportunities for the future. So I think the presence of all of these people coming into a community, raising the prices, changing the land use, changing local livelihoods, changing this whole economic horizon of the area can exacerbate a lot of underlying gender inequalities.
But is it the role of the mining company to come in and change cultural practices? They come in with their own values, and is that the role that they should take on?
No. I mean, it's a complicated question, but I think ultimately the opportunity that the mining companies have is to come in and empower the local communities. And I think trying to make sure that the impacts of their projects are not disproportionately on one or the other, and that the resources and the benefits that come from a mining company locating in an area, those should be equally distributed. And you should be supporting the community to make their own decisions and supporting everyone in the community to make their own decisions and to advance, making sure that you're not disproportionately benefiting just the men. So I think that I've worked on a lot of projects where they're really trying to make sure that women in the community have access to benefits. It's not to put their own values on the community, but to give a voice and to make sure those resources are really working for the best of everybody in the community.
It's been a really interesting conversation, this, and I want to end it with looking ahead. Do you think that we're heading in the right direction? And when do we know that we've achieved gender equality in the sector?
I think it's certainly change is happening, and from my own experience of seeing companies' enthusiasm for this and requesting our help, I think it's definitely moving in the right direction. I think we will have, I don't know that we will have, it'd be hard to say we've achieved it.
Is it measurable?
Is it measurable? I mean, I think it's really about equality of opportunities, which is tricky to measure because I don't think we should be measuring it based on do we have 50-50, but really more on do people feel like that choice is up to them and that their choices aren't limited. So yeah, that's harder to measure, but I think we're moving in that direction. It's slow, because so much of this, it's not about just putting the right policies in place, but really genuinely creating an environment where people feel like they have the choice. So that's hard, but we're getting there.
Katie, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
This is Highgrade.